We're getting closer and closer to being able to easily step between physical and virtual worlds. So for me, this isn't a question of whether we're going to get there, it's how. What is it going to take for it to be profitable for all developers to build these kind of large efforts for VR? And to get to that level, we think that we need about 10 million people on a given platform. Right? So that's the threshold where the number of people using and buying VR content makes it sustainable and profitable for all kinds of developers. And once we get to and cross this threshold, then we think that the content and the ecosystem are just going to explode. So we need to ask, what are the key attributes of the ideal VR system? Right, so if we can bring these three qualities together into one product, then we think that that is the foundation for the ideal form factor for VR. I am excited to announce Oculus Quest. It is shipping in the spring, and it is going to cost $399. This is it. This is the all-in-one VR experience that we have been waiting for. It's wireless, it's got hand presence, 6 degrees of freedom, and it runs Rift-quality experiences. Let's take a closer look.
Oculus Quest is an all-in-one VR system. It's just you and your hands, completely free and immersed. With 6 degrees of freedom, state-of-the-art optics, and built-in audio. You can forget about wires, PCs, and phones. Oculus Quest is ready to play when you are. The headset relies on 4 ultra-wide-angle sensors to map your environment as you navigate through it. And with Oculus Insight tracking, every move you make in the real world translates right into the game you're playing. Combine that with Oculus Touch controllers, and the game is at your fingertips. So when you grab, swing, or cast a spell, you'll feel the power of every gesture. The next level of VR gaming is finally here. Introducing Oculus Quest.
The history of technology is nothing if not the history of humans trying to connect. We domesticated horses and bridled them. We built trains across the wilderness. We laid thousands of miles of copper under land and sea. We've invented cars. We flew planes across continents and oceans, all to connect. Yet with all of our technological progress, we still have tremendous limitations on our ability to connect. And the biggest limitation is physics. There is simply no substitute yet for being there. Now, nothing has been better at breaking down the barriers imposed on us by physics than the phone. The phone is the greatest computing device ever invented. We're using these tiny windows to reach out and connect with people. And as a society, we've just maxed out whatever bandwidth these little devices can provide. We can do better. So what would it take to feel transported to another place? I expect virtual reality to be a platform primarily centered around human connection. Looking 5 or 10 years down the road, this could have really profound impacts on the fabric of society. People often think of virtual reality as a competitor to telepresence. It's not. It's a competitor to real estate. Cities and roads are occupied by the space companies need to connect their employees face to face. Shockingly, this is not a misappropriation of our precious time and space, because that is how valuable it is for humans to connect in person. If you could enable even a fraction of that to be done remotely through virtual reality, you will have done tremendous good in allowing society to reallocate some of its most limited resources. Not only would people be able to connect with the people that matter most to them in real life because they're commuting less, but this would also enable access to jobs to those who today have limited opportunity due to geography. This potential to transform the global landscape is incredible, and it's the reason that we're prioritizing the investments to deliver this technology in a human-centric way. You're all already familiar with Oculus Rift, which has been powering great VR experiences with PCs for years now. Earlier this year, we announced Oculus Go, which is focused on entertainment and social use cases and is by far the most affordable way to get into virtual reality. And as you've just heard Mark announce, we are excited next year to launch Oculus Quest. But you're not stopping there. We're also going to work on future technology that will unlock even more. Instead of taking the real world and overlaying virtual objects on top of it, like we plan to do with augmented reality, you can also take real-world objects and integrate them into virtual reality so that everything can interact. This is super important for unlocking future use cases like reimagining how we collaborate at work. What you're about to see is actual footage from a prototype of mixed reality shot with the Oculus Quest. So as I put my headset on, we can see the virtual world overlaid on a very, very crude reconstruction of the real world behind it. And here I'm watching a video of my son and I playing with iron powder and a birthday candle for Science Saturday, when I get a notification that my wife sent me some photos on Messenger. And I can go in and browse and pick out a few favorites before it's time to get back to work. The top of my to-do list is to work on my OC5 script, so I better get to it. You can see that I'm able to access my real-life keyboard and desk in front of me while enjoying the boundless space that virtual reality affords me. And then I get a notification that tells me I've got a meeting. My speech will have to wait. I make my way into a virtual room somewhere in the metaverse that allows me to work alongside my team in a persistent environment. Someday there will be people in here, lots of people, imagine it. And here comes my colleague now. This is a very early concept, but the ideas are starting to take shape. Being able to connect with people both physically proximate to you and physically distant at the same time has the potential to tremendously broaden our capacity to connect with other people, especially if you can have access to all of your information without constantly having to check your phone. Mixed reality won't be ready for a while, but it is on our roadmap. We think it's a huge part of the next 5 years of virtual reality and an important step on the path to augmented reality.
We're already seeing people using Rift for work. Iris VR lets architects jump right in at any point during development, so they could preview an entire job site. Skydance Interactive used Medium to build their newest game, Archangel. Previously, concepting something like this custom cockpit would take up to 6 months, and the team would still have to guess how things would look in VR. But with Medium, the 3D designs took only a week. Artists can move seamlessly from 2D into VR. As you can imagine, manipulating a model in 3D space is so much easier. Just look at how the textures are coming to life on Toby the robot. And Dash automatically brings in all the UI, so it's the same workflow, but now in a 3D space.
It's instructive to look at the PC revolution, which is the closest analogy to what we're collectively doing with VR. PCs and their mobile descendants are the core, of the first great wave of human-oriented computing, the greatest change in how we live in nearly a century. That wave came together in the 70s at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where a team of researchers took on the mission to create the Office of the Future to build the first personal computer, the Alto. Steve Jobs negotiated 2 visits to see the super-secret Alto in 1979. Here's what he said about that years later. And within 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this someday. It was obvious. You could argue about how many years it would take. You could argue about who the winners and losers might be. You couldn't argue about the inevitability. It was so obvious. The Macintosh and Windows spread the technology Park had created. Developers built the software we use today on that foundation. Moore's Law enabled computers to get much smaller and 1 million times faster. And the result is a world in which all of us make our living using personal computers and communicate and stay in touch with smartphones. So the first great wave of human-oriented computing didn't just happen. The foundation was created by a team with a critical mass of talent and a vision at Park, and then an ever-expanding community of developers and hardware companies built that out into the world we live in today. Now let's apply Steve's words to the second great wave, VR and AR. You couldn't argue about the inevitability. It was so obvious. Imagine a VR headset that's a sleek, stylish, lightweight visor with a 200-degree field of view, retinal resolution, high dynamic range, and proper depth of focus, with audio that's so real you can't believe it's computer-generated, that lets you mix real and virtual freely, that lets you meet, share, and collaborate with people regardless of distance, and that lets you use your hands to interact with the virtual world. If that existed, we'd be working, playing, and connecting in it every day. Imagine AR glasses that are socially acceptable and all-day wearable, that give you useful virtual objects like your phone, your TV, and virtual workspaces, that give you perceptual superpowers, a context-aware personal assistant, and above all, the ability to connect, share, and collaborate with others anywhere, anytime. If those glasses existed today, we'd all be wearing them right now. That's all obvious, and while it may be hard to believe, it's all doable. We really will be wearing those AR glasses and working, playing, and connecting in VR before too long. Here's a concept drawing of what a waveguide VR headset could look like. So while something like that is still years in the future, it's so compelling that I expect it to eventually happen. So for display, not only have my predictions already come true, but I'm more excited about the future than ever. This is definitely a deep research problem right now, but here's a video of one experiment. I predict the first time you get to use your hands with haptics in VR will be as much of a revelation as the first time that you put on a VR headset. Here's a picture of a real apartment. Now, here's a reconstruction of that apartment done with consumer-grade sensors. Every time I see this, I'm astonished at how realistic it looks. It's easy to see how this level of reconstruction will enable virtual teleportation and powerful mixed reality. As we saw, a model of this detail and complexity takes time to construct. Instant real-time capture and reconstruction of the real world is also possible. It won't be as complete and polished, but will let you move around safely, interact with real objects, and mix real with virtual effectively. And that will be here within 4 years as well. Consider the face tracking video I showed 2 years ago. Now contrast that with this.
A good morrow to you, my boy. It's healthier to cook without sugar. Thank you, she said.
It's hard to believe, but one of those is a reconstruction, not a video. Can you tell which?
Statuesque composure.
The one on the right is the reconstruction. If you look closely enough, there are imperfections in the neck, the hair, the eyes, and the mouth, but it's impressively close to the real thing.
Thank you, she said, dusting herself off. George is paranoid about a few.
This is a novel machine learning-based approach we call codec avatars. And while it's still in an early stage, if it could be made to work for everyone and included bodies and hands, it would revolutionize how we communicate and collaborate. Put it together with mixed reality, and where you live would no longer have to be tied to where you work. You could visit, really visit with your family, even if you lived thousands of miles away. And of course, it would enable by far the best multiplayer games ever made. A VR environment that you could configure any way you wanted with virtual screens, holograms, whiteboards, and whatever, then switch between configurations instantly. That's the most productive solo work environment I can imagine. And then, if we add virtual humans, it would become an amazingly productive collaborative environment as well. If all of my 4-year predictions come true, and virtual humans also lands, then a virtual workspace that replaces personal computers is a done deal. The bottom line is that things are pretty much on track. 4 years from now, VR is going to jump to the next level. And that's just the start. Every area will continue to improve, and virtual humans and likely haptic hands will be along before too long. All of us gathered together today, both physically present and in VR, are quite literally creating the future. Our work is going to have a huge impact on how people live 10, 20, 50 years from now. Think of how much the world we live in has been shaped by Xerox PARC and everything that followed. What we're collectively doing now will shape the future even more powerfully. A technology wave like this comes along only once every few decades, and we are all unbelievably fortunate to be here for the beginning of this one. We're positioned to connect the world in ways far beyond anything that's ever existed before, and to make people more productive and their lives more fun while we're at it. Years from now, I promise you, we'll all look back on this as a golden time, a time when we literally made the future together. Thank you.